Okay, welcome everybody to the French Canadian Heritage Society meeting. Thank you for coming. Glad to have you here on this beautiful day in Michigan. A few quick notes. We have some information in regards to moving forward with our 325th anniversary coming up in May of next year. Please stay tuned for announcements and our Facebook postings, and please join us in preparing for that. I would like to introduce to you John Vernew, our membership person and registrar, and he'll give you some updates on our membership drive. John, you're muted. There you go.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome. If you're a member of the French Canadian Heritage Society of Michigan, welcome. And if you're a visitor, welcome. We'd just like to remind you that our renewal portal is now open. You should have probably received by now the October journal, the Michigan's Habitat Heritage Journal, and in that is our renewal form. You can fill that out and send it in via the USPS, regular postage, or you can go online and renew on the online portal. I would just like to remind everybody that we have new membership levels with a slight increase in membership fees to take care of the rapidly escalating postal costs and the rapidly escalating printing costs. We are offering a digital-only membership level this year. This entitles you to receive the journal via going to our website, but we are still insisting on printing and mailing out our journal. Unlike other genealogical societies, we will not give up the printed journal. So the three levels are digital only at the same price as last year, which is $35. Printed and mailed to the United States, which is $40. That's a $5 increase over last year. And the printed and mailed to Canada, which is $55. So as I said, you can send in that renewal form that you received with the journal, or you can go online. If you go online, don't get frustrated. Go slow. But if you do get frustrated, email me at membership@habitatheritage.org. and I'll help you through the whole process. Forgot your password? Email me at membership@habitatheritage.org. Can't get through the process? Email me. I'll help you. That's what I'm here for. The two things that trip people up most is that they forget to click on buy now when they filled out all their information, or they don't complete the credit card information at the end. But once again, if you're having difficulty doing the online renewal, email me. I'm happy to help, and I understand your frustration. If you have other questions, email me at membership@habitatheritage.org. We hope to hear from you, and that's all I have to say.
Thank you, John. Gail, do you want to take a minute and remind people of your newest book?
Yes. The newest book is The Burials from Assumption, Windsor, Assumption Sandwich, which really goes along with the burials from St. Anne in Detroit. You really should purchase both books because the people who are in the books went back and forth across the border in that first 100 years. If you need any information, you can contact me at store@habitatheritage.org, or you can go online and look under the book section for the information to order. You can either order it through the mail, because the correct form, thanks to John, is now online, or you can use the order form that comes on the website. If you have any questions, again, just store@habitatheritage.org or information@habitatheritage.org. I answer both of them, and I answer every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. All right, if there's no other questions or concerns, I am going to now hand off the presentation to our program coordinator, Daniel. Please take it away.
Okay, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Steve and Kathie Libert. Steve and Kathie are love history, adventure, and mysteries. They met in high school in Dayton, Ohio, and immediately realized they had interests in common. And after college and marriage, Steve continued his childhood interest in his search for Robert LaSalle's ship Le Griffon and convinced Kathie to take part. Complementing each other with their unique skills and research techniques, they discovered that together they made a great team. Steve, a retired senior intelligence analyst for the Chief of Naval Operations, and Kathie's entrepreneurial experience in owning her own marketing and communications business made a perfect match for success. A gifted researcher, Steve has over 45 years of experience researching legends and Great Lakes mysteries. His expertise in underwater technology and adventurous spirit in high-risk adventures such as wreck diving, that's W-R-E-C-K diving, not R-E-C diving, offered him the opportunity to participate in many historical endeavors. His underwater expeditions and missions have taken him on journeys that only a few others have dared undertake, to the East China Sea, Okinawa, Florida's Keys, and his beloved Great Lakes. He's acted as consultant to the late renowned author Clive Cussler as NUMA's Virginia director, the distinguished archaeologist Dr. Lee Spence on the Confederate submarine CSS Hunley, and the late legendary shipwreck researcher Bob Fleming. Steve has directly participated and or shared his knowledge and expertise in projects such as the Titanic, I-52 submarine, Navy Flight 19 Avengers, the Bonhomme Richard, the vessel of John Paul Jones, and the Poverty Island mystery, the sinking of Carl D. Bradley, missing L-39C Albatross, and his lifelong quest, Le Griffon. Steve's appeared on various national and international media outlets, including ABC and Paris and NPR radio, and has conducted many presentations throughout the Great Lakes region. Steve received his BA in political science and economics from Wright State in Dayton, Ohio, and Kathie received her Bachelor of Fine Arts degree with a minor in biology from Wright State as well. They both reside in Charlevoix, Michigan. So without further ado, I give you Steve Libert.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I'd like to thank the French Canadian Historical Heritage Society, for inviting Kathie and I to do this presentation. And my wife, Kathie, is standing behind me, and she,
Not for long.
not for long. She actually, and I will say this, she is working on an important project with the Titanic. Probably in the near future, that'll be coming out in future press releases. And I know it'll be coming down in Detroit before long. So, but when she can, she'll release more information. So, and she is working with the people from RMS Titanic out of Atlanta, Georgia, that actually own all the artifacts and have the salvage permits on the Titanic.
But I'm going to go ahead and let him take over. Nice meeting everyone. Thank you.
Yeah. What I'd like to do is actually start out by showing you, as you can see on the screen, you are looking at the Huron Islands. Now, what's important about that is we know from primary sources that the Griffon went down among the Huron Islands. But what lake are the Huron Islands in? And most people thought that it has to be Lake Huron, right? Huron Islands, Lake Huron. And if you stop and think about it, it's probably a good deduction. Lake Huron itself, and most people don't know this, but there are over 30,000 islands in Lake Huron. 30,000, can you believe it? But as I'll show you in this presentation, I'll show you what led us to Lake Michigan. And as Dan pointed out, I've been diving in Lake Michigan for almost 45 years. And tell me, I'll tell you, it hasn't been easy. As we get older, things get twice as complicated. So I'd like to start out, I'm going to be also referring to some of my notes here because I don't want to take a long time explaining things, but I definitely want to get some of the most important points. Actually, my interest in LaSalle and Griffon started when I was in the 8th grade. That's in Dayton, Ohio, present day Huber Heights. It's been incorporated, so it's Huber Heights today, just outside of Dayton. And a history teacher in 8th grade was talking about early European explorations into this new world. And as he's walking around the room, he takes a look at me. I thought maybe he didn't think I was paying attention, but believe me, I was listening to every word. But he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Who knows? Maybe someone in this room will find that missing ship one of these days." And that stuck with me. And I owe all that in that interest from an 8th grade teacher. And believe me, did that stick with me. So I'd like to always start out too, to let people know, and I think most of us are aware today, that there are a lot of, regardless of what story, what mystery, what legend, even current events, there's always misinformation that's going around, and a lot of people do not sometimes can't separate or distinguish from what's true and what's not. And I like to always show this image, an image by Father Hennepin. And as we all know, Father Hennepin, a Jesuit priest, was with LaSalle on his expedition. Hennepin actually was one of the first Europeans to see the Niagara Falls. And so this is one of the renderings that was done. And as you look in the rendering, and I like to ask people, if you can see anything that's incorrect, otherwise, or doesn't belong into this image. And I don't know if anyone's ever seen this, but I'll point it out real fast with this laser. If you look, there's a tree in the background. This is supposed to be around Cuyahoga Creek, West New York State, on the Cuyahoga Creek, as you can see the creek here. But if you look at this tree, it's a palm tree. And I don't think there are many palm trees in the New York region. You can also take a look and see the 2 indigenous tribe members hunting and chasing a deer that's jumping over this log here. What's wrong with that? Well, if any hunters are out there, which I'm not, by the way, but I do know you don't run and hunt with a bow and arrow as you're running after a deer to try to shoot it, So that's one of the also things that are wrong with this picture. Also, the mountains in the background. There are no mountains in this part of the New York State. So the importance of this is to show that even back during then, there was exaggeration. And therefore, I knew that when I started researching, I'm going to find out a lot that's exaggerated, some that's not. And the hardest thing to separate, as my wife would always say, is the misinformation. And because that can really lead you astray and send you down the wrong spoke of a road if you're not sure which one to take. And I like to show just a little video here, and I can turn it up or down, but I think it should be all right. Well, anyway, that video, I like to show that because there's quite a few of my colleagues in there. Actually, three of them have passed on now. But I also show the different boats that we have to use because of the area is so vast and there's a lot of shoals, a lot of deep water, a lot of shoals. That whole area that we were showing, like I say, are the Huron Islands. And there are a lot of people that were arguing about it, but you know, through research, we end up finding actually where they do lay. One of the issues that we've had is that not everything is found online. When we started the research, it was all done by the Dewey Decimal System, going to the libraries and looking up books, looking at microfiche. Some of the youngsters today have no idea what I'm talking about when I say that. But even with today, it is extremely difficult to find things that haven't been actually found or recorded. And the issue becomes is, does that information exist? And believe me, I will say half of what we use to find the Griffon, even today, you can find by looking in a laptop or computer system. It was done by the archives, looking at old maps and charts. And believe me, and I think many of you know how painstaking that is. One of the things about LaSalle is basically his legacy. And I believe history does note and will continue that had it not been for Robert LaSalle and the Griffon, there may not have been a Louisiana Purchase. And as we know, LaSalle actually left. The ship Griffon was built above the Niagara Falls at Cuyahoga Creek, and on the banks of the Niagara River. And the Griffon then had to sail up the Niagara River against the current into Lake Erie. And now we're talking about a ship that is particularly just sail, that's all it is. And then they had ropes where if they got close to shore and they couldn't make it against rapids, they would actually have to take ropes and pull the boat. And this is exactly what happened in the Niagara River. And the importance about this is that parts of the Niagara River where they had to pull the ship, the water depth's only 4 feet deep along that area. Now, you have to consider if you build a ship, the Griffon, how much draft, which is how much water that the boat would displace, will it hit bottom? And remind you now that they're going against the current. There was little wind to sail on those particular days that the Griffon was built. We know that from source records. So the issue is they had to pull a lot of the boat by rope along the shore. And really where the misinformation comes in, there are many people telling me that the Griffon is going to be built the same as the ship LaBelle. That's a whole different story, but that was another LaSalle ship that actually sank in Matagorda Bay and off the coast of Houston about 1668. But here's the issue. LaBelle drafted 8 feet 4 inches. And I don't think anyone, knowing how deep the Niagara River is going to build a ship that's going to draft 8 feet when they know they're only going through 4 feet of water. Now, certainly it gets deeper as you get out to the center, but they had to pull the ship along the shores, like I said. Then they had to go into Lake Erie. That's fine. Lake Erie is deep enough. They almost had an issue sailing past Long Point in Lake Erie, which sticks out close to 30 miles into Lake Erie. But at night it was dark. They can hear the waves breaking over the shoals. So LaSalle basically told his skipper, Luke, which a lot of people refer to as Luke the Dane. They don't know if he's really Danish or they just called him that. But they said he was a gigantic person. But we end up finding out that he was really not. He was a short person. And that's, like I say, a story in itself. So what happened? LaSalle took over. And then they sailed the ship towards the Detroit area, present-day Detroit area. And it's coming up the waters there. And there was a couple choke points, as I call them. That's waters that are shallow for the ship to go through. And there was one at the beginning of the present-day Detroit River, and one at the St. Clair River, and also at the opening as they're going into Lake Huron. So the Griffon had to make it around those particular areas. Again, I don't think anyone's going to build a vessel that's going to draft 8 feet when they know they're only going through now, this time, 3 to 4 feet of water along the waters of present-day Detroit. So the Griffon then made it to Mackinac Island. That particular area, that is, for most of people in Michigan, they know where that is. That's at the straits between Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. And there is like an 8-mile bridge that crosses there today. But they supposedly pulled into Mackinac Island. And I just want to just trace back a little bit about this Louisiana Purchase. In 1803, Jefferson sent Livingston and Moreau to France to buy property that LaSalle had claimed on his earlier expedition. That property was just west of the Mississippi. And a lot of that area that LaSalle claimed for King Louis XIV became part of French territory. And I'll show you a map here in a minute. But the interesting thing about this is because of LaSalle and the lands that he claimed, and because of Louisiana Purchase, in which after 1803, Livingston actually claimed, and he wrote this, which I think is really just magnificent. Livingston writes, "We have lived long, but this is the noblest of our whole lives. From this day, the United States takes place among the powers of the first rank." So by claiming this territory, the United States now doubles the size of the present day. It was 1803, it doubled the present size of the country. And in this particular map, you can see New France. The territory obviously went down into the Gulf of Mexico, up to the Rockies, up into even Canada, Prince Rupert's land, as they called it, which is up in this whole area, because it's present day Canada through a lot of this area up here. And at that particular time, you can see where the British colonies are in the East Coast. They also had Dutch there. They got Spaniards down in the Florida area, and then of course over into the Mexican area with Mexico. And but it's just a vast amount of land, very rich. Got the country excited to expand and go west. And and then from there, we just never looked back. And obviously, I think everyone knows the importance of having borders to the ocean for defense purposes. And of course, that history is well known today. Another interesting thing, a lot of people may or may not know, but later on, the Jefferson sent 2 explorers to look at the land that they purchased, Louisiana Territory purchased. And those 2 people were Lewis and Clark. And I think most people know that. Another thing that was very important is trying to figure out where the Huron Islands were, but as soon as we did, now it was difficult to try to figure out which island was it. And there are quite a few islands there, but not Lake Huron. There's not 30,000. But there were some writings that in some of the transcripts where LaSalle's account of the ship, because it was lost, LaSalle's account of the ship that it went down near the Huron Islands. And we had to try to figure out, okay, so where are the Huron Islands, even if they're in Lake Michigan? And let me backtrack just here a little bit. I got off a little course here, but at Mackinac Island, where the Griffon ended up, LaSalle decided they had to go further west. They were looking for a route, and I'll just back this up here. Sorry, but they were looking for a route. This is Mackinac Island up in this particular area of the Straits. They were looking for a route that supposedly they could get to the northwest in the China, and then this so they can find a route in order they could buy furs or buy spices and such for trade purposes. Excuse me. So what had happened? LaSalle found that out from the Indians. So their route was supposedly to go across the northern part of Lake Michigan, and then they found out, hey, you can't get there from there. And they found out, well, we'll just go to the bottom of Lake Michigan, which is down here. And but somewhere along the line, they pulled into an island which we consider Washington Island today, which is Washington Island. Back years ago, it was the Huron Islands or Potawatomi Island. And we know that from records and old maps. And one of the accounts that LaSalle was saying was that he heard that the ship was buried among the sands. Now, why LaSalle did not know this is because when they pulled into Washington Island, LaSalle sent the ship back to Fort Frontenac in order to resupply, and then the Griffon was supposed to come back and pick him up at the southern end of Lake Michigan. Well, what had happened? His ship never came back. LaSalle, after he sent the Griffon back, he went in canoes with numerous other men to the southern part of Lake Michigan, and was waiting for the Griffon to return, but it never happened. So the account that LaSalle mentioned is that they believe that the ship sank among the Huron Islands. There were a couple different theories: that it was sunk by a storm, it was captured by the Indians, his own men mutinied, and which one was it? Well, no one knew. And the only way we were going to try to find out ourselves was if we can find the ship. So, and then also in another account, LaSalle said the bark could not keep a straight course, but drove obliquely towards some islands blocked by great sand banks, which extends outward more than 2 leagues. Having been underwater exploration in the Great Lakes, especially Lake Michigan, for over 40 years, I knew where this area where he was describing, there's only a couple areas in the Great Lakes that would fit, that account would fit. And that had to be up in the northern part of Lake Michigan. And as we can see right here, this is Lake Michigan. Back years ago, it was Lake Illinois. But this is Lake Michigan. For most of you that may not know, but I'm pretty sure most people in this organization probably have seen this chart. This is the Door County area, and through here, Green Bay, Wisconsin would be here. This is the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, the Garden, today known as the Garden Peninsula. But in one of the accounts in Claude Bonneau's map, he writes that finally between this lake of the Illinois and Lake Superior is seen a long bay called Bay de Ponds, at the head of which is a mission of Saint Francis Xavier, which is actually down here. And at its entrance is encountered the islands called Huron. And these are the Huron Islands here. So the Huron Indians took refuge there, and hence they called it Huron Islands. So that was a good indication that this is the area that we were talking about. And this is where the mystery begins, basically, is exactly which one of these islands. Now, granted, this is an old chart. Usually a map's dealing with terrestrial bodies. This is a chart usually dealing with islands and water. So this is another rendition of that. This is Lake Illinois. Of course, it has an Indian name at this particular time. Again, Charlevoix area is over here, Straits of Mackinac up here. This is the Green Bay, entrance to Green Bay here. And this is Wisconsin through here. So this is where the Hurons took refuge after the destruction of their nation by the Iroquois. So, so that's important. Right there, we know that we're going to start looking there. This is a color version of a similar map. It's very important to notice on here, you can see this design here. That's actually an Indian village. And there's another one out here on this particular little island. And by the way, there is an Indian village there, and there is one on Poverty Island. We believe this to be Poverty Island. And if this was true, I needed to look to see if I can find any remnants of Indian artifacts, and we did. And we had never mentioned that to anyone. As a matter of fact, this is the first time on this presentation I ever mentioned that artifacts were found there. Now, we believe this to be Summer Island, which, if today's map, this would be Summer Island, because it is actually in the position where it should be. Now, there was a Indian excavation, and they did find materials there, and a couple of the archaeologists from Michigan State University, Chuck Cleveland, archaeologist, was one of the archaeologists involved. He lives actually just outside of Charlevoix. We talked many times about this, and so somewhere along here, which island is it? Did the Griffon go down? If indeed it was among the Huron Islands. This area out here is called the Beaver Island chain. A lot of people have been up to Beaver Island. History behind that was King Stang, when he was supposedly the first king in the interior of the United States. But that's a different story, very impressive story. But we didn't believe it had anything to do with these particular islands, because there's this is quite significant distance there to travel. So when LaSalle left, this is his trace when he left the Niagara River, and you could see in the red the trace he would have taken. In this particular area is where the ship disappeared. This is a blow-up image of it. And as you can see, and from records, the Griffon traveled 40 leagues, according to historic records, traveled 40 leagues and came to anchor at a place with a bay that was deep enough for them to actually dock and stay for a few days. But during this particular travels, they just reached the present-day Washington Island just on the tail end of a 4-day storm. And so they made it in there, and this storm hit, and it lasted 4 days, and it kept them at bay for a while. And so what happened is, from there is where LaSalle sent the Griffon back to Fort Frontenac to resupply. Meanwhile, he was going to go in canoes to the southern end of Lake Michigan. And so LaSalle left this, the Griffon left this direction again, and LaSalle traveled down to the south. Now, here's the issue. A lot of people get confused. It confused me so much too, because in the historical records, even though they were in French, I don't speak or read French, but I had different interpreters interpret it. And believe me, it took about 5 times because each expert had 5 different meanings. But we know that there was a 4-day storm that upon the arrival of Griffon at Potawatomi Island, which is here, present-day Washington Island. And when Griffon set sail, the weather was supposedly, that was on September the 18th, the weather is supposed to be fair and calm and just a slight west wind. So this blue line is actually shown when Griffon departed. So meanwhile, the very next day on September the 19th, LaSalle left in canoes and traveled down across, this point is Death's Door, they call it, Port de Mort, which means door of death. And halfway across this strait, they ran into another 4-day storm, a massive 4-day storm, which kept LaSalle and his men in canoes at bay for 6 days. Storm lasted 4 days. It still took another 2 days for the storm to really calm down so LaSalle and his canoes can continue with their journey. Why is this important? Because when LaSalle sent the Griffon back this particular direction, they said it was a nice day. And this is what really threw me off. Well, how can it be nice? Because later on, we found some information that they had to pull into a small bay because of supposedly a storm. Well, anyone that's ever been here, and most people have not, but it is extremely visited today. People live on this island. If you look at inside this bay out towards the open lake, you hardly see any kind of white water from the backside of the waves. It looks calm. So what was written, what they were looking at is basically the remnants of the waves and the weather after 4 days, but there were still heavy swells in large waves. LaSalle Griffon didn't know that. The Griffon didn't know that until they got around this island right about in here. And then all of a sudden, they were getting hit by residual waves. And how do we know that? Well, there was a French chronicler, Lepatre, who wrote a number of years later that the Griffon was driven by a storm into a small bay 5 or 6 leagues from where the anchorage, which it left. So we know it left Washington Island. Here's the bay. It went 5 or 6 leagues, which this is a story in itself. I won't explain it, but a lot of this information is in our book. How much is a league? Well, yeah, you can go to a dictionary and find out, but that wasn't what the league was LaSalle's time. I refer it to a LaSalle's league. I wanted to know what LaSalle knew the league was since it was during his time. Well, we end up finding out that it's 3 statute miles. Now, here's the complication that comes in. Statute miles versus nautical miles. There's a difference. And which one was LaSalle using, statute miles or nautical miles? We end up finding out with statute miles. During this time, French was, the French were converting over to new measurements. And what I didn't know, but I did find out during research, is that back in LaSalle's time, they were using terrestrial measurements, not nautical measurements, when even measuring distance on water. So, and it's a whole interesting process, how they determine how long a league was. And one of the issues, one of the interesting things that found out that the French would, the voyagers would get their canoes, paddle the canoes. They would chant some type of a shanty song, but and they would go near shore, and but they would have these markers on shore. So as a canoe would pass certain areas, they could actually measure shore and measure that distance on the terrestrial land. And then they could look out in the water, see how far that canoe went. And then they come up with these chants to actually last so long. So when they were done with a chant, they knew as long as they could keep up the paddling in the strokes, they knew how far they traveled approximately, which I thought was ingenious, especially when you're out in the water. So, but anyway, so LaSalle, he now, like I said, he's headed for the south end of Lake Michigan, near past Chicago there on the south end. The Griffon with Luke and 5 others headed to the north. They pulled in behind Poverty Island. How do I know that's the bay? 5 or 6 leagues from here, believe it or not, is actually the exact mileage. So it's actually 16 miles to pull into this bay. And there is a bay there, unlike with most historians and mariners would say, but there is a small bay. And I know that because if any of you saw that video with that red trap net boat sitting there, that boat's sitting right on shore. That's a protected bay in there. It's not a big bay, but it's protected. The water is deep enough to get a boat in there, unlike what most mariners would say, it's not deep enough. Well, believe me, ladies and gentlemen, you can step right offshore and be in 60 feet of water just by 2 steps. And I found out that the hard way. So anyway, so here's where our journey begins. Where did LaSalle go down in the Huron Islands? We decided to look in that area, in that bay near Poverty Island and on the outskirts. And even though it didn't happen overnight, it actually took 5 or 10 years. During the time we were diving, believe it or not, the waters were really murky. This is actually cleaned up now because of the zebra mussels and quagga mussels. But back during the time when we started really exploring this area, it was only a couple feet visibility. And in one of the dives, I end up running into this piece sticking out of the bottom. I had no idea what I ran into. The other 2 divers were topside. I decided to take another look and went back down. And I did put a flotation marker around this piece. It was just a rope with a float on it, sent it to the surface, and then we'd come back later to check it out. Well, when I bumped into it, and actually it really did. It scared me. It knocked my mask off. I had no idea what it was, but I knew it wasn't the anchor line, as I tell people. But I was really fearful that I might have been caught in some type of a pound net stake or trap net, because underwater, those break loose and they float around, and it wouldn't be the first time we got caught in those before. But I knew this wasn't a fishing ground. So, but meanwhile, so we bumped into this, I bumped into this piece. Later on, we would get great photographs, as you can see here. And this is the reason I had this one up. As you can see, these little, as some people looked at this during other presentations, because this is available to them online, they call these tiny little sticks sticking out of this piece of wood. And well, these aren't sticks. They're what they call tree nails or trunnels. And I'll explain that. Now, below this, we expected to find a ship, which this is a rendering of what we expected to find. Here's that piece sticking out of the bottom. We expected that to be attached to a ship that's sitting here below the muck. So this blue column is the water column. This other color would be muck or sediment. And then this is a hard bottom, and this is the lake bottom down here. So the issue was, is there a ship buried there or not? Now, this is what a modern day bowsprit looks like. And people say, hey, there's no little stick sticking out of here, no trunnels. They didn't make bowsprits like they did what I just showed you. Well, that's not true. And the reason why is because we were looking for a French ship. This is a French ship. This is how the French ships were built in the 17th, 18th century. Not all French ships, but quite a few, where this is the bowsprit coming through here. These are those tree nails. And what is this? Oh my goodness, this is a tree, this is a knee that is attached to the bowsprit by tree nails. That's exactly how they would attach it. They would drill the holes and put this piece over top, and then they would insert splines to tighten the tree nails up to hold this in place. And this is exactly what they did. Now this, excuse me, this is a little blurred, but this is the ship LaBelle that sank in 1686 in Matagorda Bay off the coast of Houston. You could see from their model, and I remind you, their model was based after all the recovered artifacts and ship components, and their expert modelers put together what they believed the LaBelle to look like from the pieces they salvaged. Even though they didn't find the knee up here, or the bowsprit, but they knew from drawings of LaBelle that this had it on. And hence, this is exactly what we found, except we didn't have the knee applied to it. Excuse me. Now, one of the things too about the bowsprit that we located, there are many people calling it a pound net stake. And I'll get into that and show you. I don't want to go overboard here on time, but I definitely want to get through this to show you some of the interesting facts on this bowsprit. And as the French noted, that this piece is highly intelligent in design to be that of a pound net stake. Now, if you look at this piece, what you're looking at, this was probably where the mast staff rested. We're not sure. This is by the way, this is the top of the bowsprit that was protruding out of the water here. This is just a crack because the wood's so old. And this is shortly after it was extracted from the water. This is a small dead fish. But if you notice up here, in which I noticed, and and I can't believe it, because once this was extracted, there were at least 3 archaeologists, 4 or 5 people standing around, and we're all looking at the same thing. Their eyes went to this. My eyes went to this. And I think if you're looking at this, I think most people can agree that looks like the letter D. And so sure enough, more research. This is what the letter D on our bowsprit looks like with the serifs. This is actually one of the letter Ds on LaBelle that they end up finding after they put it through preservation and restoration. And of course, it shows a serif right here. And you can see the D lining coming up around. Now, we believe this to be carved, but a couple of the other archaeologists, once it was pointed out, they thought it might be stamped. We're still not sure. But just so you know, both of these are like 3/4 of an inch. That's the size of it. So you can picture that. So that's a close-up view of it. You can see here. And sure enough, it is a letter D. Now, what does the D stand for? Well, some people say Debier. Some people think they were markings for tax purposes. When the Griffon was built, the woodsman was sent out into the woods to cut wood, and they would put their initials on it, and then that's how they would get paid. But as they got paid, of course, that's how they were taxed too. Others think it's just part of for the vessel being put together, like we get parts to, say, a gas grill today, and you got a image and a blueprint of where all the pieces go, and they label them with the alphabet numbers. So but we didn't think that was the case because there used to be ships built that way. Also on this bowsprit is a carving, and sorry I couldn't back it up any further. It just take up too much space. But you can see the carving that's in this particular piece. It looks like we think a winged icon, and but we're not sure. But it does look like it, and numerous people thought the same thing. Now, mind you, this piece is over 240 some years old and has been in the water. This particular area would have been underwater at the time, into the bottom sediment. Also, where one of the tree nails are protruding, this is where they would drill a hole, but they would hammer it from this side up through, exposing it, come out here. So you can see that went clear through. But if you notice here, there are some markings, and we consider that's where they put a mark so they knew where to drill the hole, much like carpenters do today when they lay out bottom and top plates to put 2x4s. And then here, there are dashed lines that actually go around to the other side, and there's another spot where they can drill. And so we believe that's what it's for. And by the way, when I say we believe it, we had archaeologists take a look at it. Now, one of the other things, which is really important, and this was overlooked by many, many people, they had different archaeologists and state archaeologists claiming this was nothing but a pound net stake. And let me tell everyone, it's not. And because what I'm showing you are the reasons why. This was also found in the bottom of the same hole that was excavated, that was actually attached by compression to the bottom of the bowsprit. So you could see where this has been carved in here, and the bowsprit would fit right here, and it was compressed. Why was it compressed? Well, the reason, and by the way, and this is 3D, you can see it better here. This is a 3D rendering of what that looks like. So you could see where it's been carved. The bowsprit would fit in here. This was what part of the box that actually held these chop blocks, wedge blocks in place. And so what this did is when they would have a bowsprit put in, let me back this up here, see if I can, okay. When they would have the bowsprit fixed to the ship, they didn't want to bolt it because these would break quite often. And once they would break, they would actually weaken the rigging, and then a lot of times the rigging would fall down. So in the particular case, they would build a little box here, and then they would take these wedges and they would wedge this in between the bowsprit and the box to hold it firmly in place. If it would snap, they could knock the wedge block out real fast without having to take any kind of bolts out, and they replace it. They always carried spare bowsprits. And so what these wedge blocks did is exactly that purpose. And so when the divers were excavating, they actually went down about 10 feet into the bottom, just large enough to get themselves in between the bowsprit. Once they got to the bottom, one of the divers told me to say, "Hey, Steve, we got something that's attached to this." I was hoping it was a ship, but it wasn't. He said, "It's small. I could feel it with my feet." He couldn't bend over because there wasn't enough room. So imagine yourself down, below 70 feet of water in a hole 10 feet deep, and just enough room for you to get in, and you're below that. And but the divers were connected by harnesses and steel cables in case we had to pull them out if it would collapse. So, and plus visibility was zero. So anyway, so that is the 3D image that was done by a Hexacon company down in the Detroit area. And so now we're getting the pictures, we're getting all the particulars on that bowsprit, why it's so sophisticated in design. Now we need to test the age. So what I did is we had carbon-14 conducted, at least 5 tests done by Beta Analytic in Miami, Florida. This President Darden Hood, which I've known for many years because of our testing, wrote this. He said, "So if I'm asked, could this would be from this ship, the Griffon, down in 1679, the radiocarbon dating results of these 2 samples do support that time period." And they do, but however, and he's right, they must be used as one line of evidence along with others to hopefully provide me with the solution. Otherwise, exactly how old is this piece? Well, so carbon-14 is great, that we're dating something 100, 200, 300, 400 years old. The thing is that when you're dealing with thousands of years old, if you're off 100 years old, that's pretty good. But when you're dealing with something 250, 300 years old, you're off 100 years old, that's a big difference. So I needed something besides carbon-14, even though carbon-14 did support the time of the Griffon, 1679. So it was suggested, hey, let's try dendrochronology. Let's cut a cookie slice off the piece. Well, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to preserve this thing. I wanted to do it in a non-intrusive way. So I was thinking, I wonder if, and I'm not the only one, by the way, but I was thinking, I wonder if a CAT scan would work. Well, who's going to let us use a CAT scan, right? That CAT scan this. We checked all over multiple states. And believe it or not, we found the answer right in their own backyard up here in northern Michigan, Gaylord Hospital. So Sago Hospital. And so we practiced for a couple of days of putting a replica, basically what it was a light pole in and out of the CAT scan because if it was needed in an emergency, we wanted to be able to get that out of there real fast, within seconds, so it could be used for emergency personnel. So this was actually done on a Saturday morning, and they figured that was the best time. Let's go. And we put it in the CAT scan. They hurried up, took their CAT scan, and we pulled it back out, and without, hindering the machine or anything. And but that wasn't an easy task, but I really appreciate the people at the Gaylord Hospital. We did have to take insurance obviously out on this piece if it was damaged, and it turned out excellent. This is a result of that CAT scan. Now we needed at least 50 rings in order to get a decent measurement. Well, as far as time age. So if dendrochronologists would start counting, the rings, and I'm pretty sure most of you know what the theory is behind that. Each so many rings is so many years. They could actually tell what the climate would have been like at that particular time. But we decided this was the best way of doing it. We end up finding out, however, that we needed at least 50 rings. And excuse me, I'm just looking at my notes. We actually needed, we only got 28 rings out of this. So as you look, we only got 28 rings. We needed 50 in order to get a decent age, much like a person's fingerprint. If you only have half the prints or quarter, it's going to be hard to match them up with their data file to find out, what person that is. So anyway, the analysis was done by Cornell University. There were many universities involved at the beginning. Now, one of the things that we also did is it took me a number of years to get French officials' interest in this particular wreck. I kept them informed many times over the years. And I mean, over the years, we're going back 20, 25, maybe 28 years. A good friend of mine helped me contact the French embassy in Washington, D.C. and set up meetings. That person was P.H. Nargelet, Paul Henry. He was one of the people that died in the submergible going down on the Titanic about 2 years ago. Page was a great guy, French submarine commander. It was on the Titanic about 36 different times, more than anyone. Also a great friend of mine, an attorney, Rick Robel, who was familiar with Michel Lour, the chief archaeologist in France. And so to make a long story short, we end up meeting in Chicago. We end up getting French to come over, French archaeologists, experts, to come over to take a look at the bowsprit. At that particular time in 2001 is when we found it. That was the only thing we found at the time. It was only after 2001, actually 2005, before we found parts of the other ship. But Mr. Lour, their chief archaeologist, he talked about the scarf at the upper end and the bevel at the lower end of the artifact, which is the bowsprit. So at the bottom is a bevel end, the top there's a scarf. He also said that the scarfing of a knee to a bowsprit served as support for a small mast, as you can see here. And that was attested to in the 17th century, but it fell in disuse in France shortly afterwards. They designed the ships different. But right here, they did attach knees to bowsprits. Hence, that's what the trundles were for, to attach a knee. And from there, a small spar, hence flagstaff, was affixed to that. And then he went on to talk about the length of it. And then there was erosion rings that's on that bowsprit, which he said that would have taken a couple hundred years in order for those erosion rings to get there. Well, I'm going to let everyone know that, there wasn't much traffic up northern Great Lakes until 1856. And if you start thinking a couple hundred years, well, wait a minute, what ship could possibly be up there and on the bottom for a couple hundred years when we know it's only 1956 or 1856 when ships started traveling, transitioning that area. When there's only one ship that can be that old that we know of and recorded is the Griffon. And it could be some other ship. No, I can't think of one, and neither can anyone else. So anyway, So again, I showed this bowsprit because so people can get this in their heads and they're in their minds that these are trunnels, okay? And the French just said they built these with the knee on it. This is the little staff that they held. These bowsprits are vital to the rigging of the ship. Now, there's been arguments, well, how did this bowsprit get into an almost perpendicular position at the bottom, which actually is a 22-degree angle? Well, the thing is that as this ship was being, was caught in a storm, as this ship was rocking and rolling, going up and down, those chock blocks became loose. They became loose and this whole bowsprit slipped out of the box. And as it went up to the air, by the way, this is my theory, as it went into the air, it was pulled back by one of these strappings of cordage rope. And as it started coming down, it came down with such force, it snapped the cordage and it sent this thing torpedoing right to the bottom, and it stuck in the bottom probably about 5 or 6 foot. And then over a period of a couple hundred years, it was buried by silt. There is a strong current in that area. So this is how we believe that got there. However, the other belief was that there was a ship connected to it under the bottom, but when we excavated, we found out that wasn't the truth. There was no ship there. It was just a bowsprit. So meanwhile, we were also studying, by the way, a lot of this is in our book, is Griffon and the Huron Islands. Kathie and I wrote that book a couple of years ago, spent a lot of research in it, had a couple other help with it, obviously from shipwrights and ship interpreters. But I just want to show you something that's on this particular ship. You know, there are different architectural designs on this particular ship. In this particular case, these are perpendicular frames. As you can see, this is the bow, as is this the bow, but these are perpendicular frames. They come directly in to the keelson on the right angle. As you look at the bottom, they're cant frames. They're actually at a particular angle, as you can see. And the French built theirs ships with perpendicular frames. Most other European countries, they had cant frames. So it's not the only indication, but it is one indication that this is a French ship, simply because of that positioning of the frames here. If you look to the right, you can see there are mortised in here where one of these frames, perpendicular, would actually go straight in, and you can tell it's not at any kind of beveled angle, as this would have to support to fit one of these in. So right there, we knew that's another indication. Another indication, this is a wooden tree nail. Now this wooden tree nail, as you notice, these tree nails are, and I'll show you another picture of that in a minute where that is. This is actually on the bow of the ship. That took some while to find that one, took a while to find that one. But these are pegged with square splines. You see that right there? Here is another picture right here. So, and why that's important? Because most splines were basically long splines that would go across the whole thing, and then they would hammer it in to spread this tree nail apart. Much like a hammer, a wooden hammer to a metal head, how they attach that even today. They put a spline in to hold the metal hammer on. So that is, and there's a lot of wooden dials or tree nails on this ship. Now let's get to the pound net stake. These are pound net stakes. They're sharped at like a pencil at the end, as you can see. This is the end of the bowsprit. It's at a bevel. Now, if you were impregnating this or penetrating this into the bottomlands, which would be easier to hammer in? One with the pointed or one with the bevel end? In 1856 is when they started using this kind of fishing, which is pound net fishing. This is a gadget they use, a steam-driven pile driver. Now, for this to work, these pile drivers would pile this straight down in the bottom. If they were at any kind of degree, this big heavy piece coming down, and if this was slanted out here, it's just not going to work. So these are how these were piled into the bottom. Our particular recovered bowsprit is at a 22-degree angle. A lot of people claim that's what we found was a driven pound net stake, and you can see why that doesn't fit either. So, and this is what a pound net stake looks like when they're sticking out of the water. These are nets in between the poles, and these nets would go clear down to a trap. This is what it looks like from an aerial view. That's that lead line. Fish would swim in. They start swimming around, sort of just being sort of trapped in here, not knowing to come back out this way. But as they're swimming around, they end up in here into this pound net trap, which is in here. And they would swim through a hole. And then the next day, fisherman, he comes through, pulls up this whole net with the fish in it. But this is what a pound net fishing apparatus looks like. The state has claimed this is what this is they're nothing but pound net stakes. There are plenty of them up there. And there are plenty of them up there, but they do not have that sophisticated design like I showed you. And so this is important, and not too many people see this unless they go to our book. But I'm going to tell everyone right now that this is where the ship is. So most people, this is the Mackinac Bridge area, Mackinac Island. The Griffon set on a 40-league trip to Washington Island. It left, pulled in behind Poverty Island. But here's where the story gets a little dicey. Soon afterwards, there was a storm, and that's why they were pulled in Poverty Island. But after the storm subsided, they took off, and they headed obliquely towards some islands in the offering, blocked by great sandbanks. Well, the only place that would have taken place is right in here, and as you could see, and so we decided to look there. We started in a little deeper water. We brought Brian Abbott, who's been with us for a number of 10 years. If anyone has seen the Titanic Mapping 2 project, it was Brian, his work that we were able to see what the Titanic looked like in the bottomlands. This is the same point sector scan that was actually used on the Titanic. This is the exact same one. Here is a heavy weight. This is the sonar. This head down here would spin. It would spin every which direction and basically take images of the outer perimeter. And this is what it would show. This is a sector scan in the tripod. As it's spinning around, it's picking up the keelson with some of the frames and the bill stringers. This is the Griffon. And then another section over here, probably a quarter of a mile away, is another section. We think this is a port bow. This is a large knee that's sitting right on the port bow, and more framework. And a lot of this is covered by rock, probably from storms, ice. But some of this I thought was interesting because this sector scan also penetrated the bottom enough to show other pieces here. Excuse me. This was important right here, showing the rock pile, which is the ballast pile of this particular ship. And so again, this is what that image that you just saw. The rock pile is over here, which is the ballast pile. And if you look at the ship, you can see the mortise that's in the keelson. Now, the Griffon, we know from records, it's 3 masts. And believe me, when I say records, we have primary source records. So we know how the ship was built, how it was supposedly constructed, supposedly, all right? But was it really that way? No one really knows. No one really knows the true size of the Griffon. But there are some scant primary source documents that describe it. And as you can see, some of the frames, I call them ribs, but one of my shipwright, every time I say ribs, he just gets so mad. He said, "Those are called frames, Steve. These are bill stringers, help to support the structure of the bottom of the ship." Now, in this particular area here, let me see if I can get that where you can see it. This is where that tree nail was with a square peg. This is actually the bow right here. And so I just wanted to show, excuse me, I thought I heard somebody say something. This is an iron band. Why am I showing this? Because it's indicative of how the French would have built that ship at the time. This is what it looks like with a lot of the silt coverage. You can see why it's difficult to find parts of the ship, the planking. It's legal to uncover materials of a ship without permits. And then, of course, here's another little saying that sometimes it takes another fresh look at someone to look at something to find it. And I'm sure all of us have looked for a contact lens, can't find it. You bring somebody new in and they start looking around and they find it. And but they say there are many factors that come into play, as in this little piece says, and one of them is the fact that you have an interest, degree of concentration. And I'm just going fast so I can try to get through this time here. And so one of the things that why we believe this is a Griffon is we found the location of the island. The historic documents produce a navigational path to the Griffon's demise. And we have multiple testings that support the age. The French knew the particular area where the Griffon went down. They just couldn't find the ship. And then we discovered the bowsprit, and it has 17th century designs, obviously. And we know it's a colonial age shipwreck, meaning 1630s to 1776. The bowsprit from the main part of the ship is 4 miles. Michel Lure, when we found the bowsprit, we didn't find the other parts of the ship, as I said. However, Michel Lure, before he had to leave back to Paris, said, "Steve, you're going to find the ship within three or 4 miles from where this bowsprit is." Well, it was actually 4 miles away. And then, of course, this is our shipwreck interpreter, Alan Pertner. He was the one diving. We took a lot of measurements of the ship. Alan just turned, this was probably taken a couple of years ago. Alan was 82 in this photo. He was actually 82 when he dove on the wreck. That's him right here. And so that's him. And after this, we took many measurements, and that's one of the mortise. This is the keelson. You can't see the keel in this picture. But here's other parts of the mortise, the frames. There were iron rods on the ship. However, there are no threaded iron bolts or nuts, nothing threaded. They're either wooden dials or iron rods. There is no threaded bolts or nuts on here. You can see some of the outside planking, the bottom of the hull. And still can't see the keelson from here, which is actually below. But here attaches a gripe plate. This is attached to the keelson. Above it is the keelson. This is the keel. And this gripe plate would actually help anchor together different parts of the bow and keep them in check so they wouldn't basically deteriorate or break apart as the ship was traveling to the water. And of course, here are some of the drawings that Al did when we were taking measurements. Al's actually almost has a full scale scaled model of the Griffon. And so he's built ships most of his life, boats, and designed some pretty nice yachts. This is what he thinks preliminary, what the Griffon may have looked like from the pieces that we've found. So he believes that the length is somewhere near 68 to 70 feet, beam 15 to 16, that's across the deck of the ship. And he thinks that the draft, even though he believes now that that's probably a bit too steep, but 5 foot 6 inches. And remember, LaBelle was 8 feet. So, and then some of his workbench. And so sorry to, just a minute, go back. Sorry to blow through that, but are there any questions or? Let me see and make sure I'm not muted here.
Yeah, I think we've got a couple questions. First, Eva was interested in knowing more about the navigational challenges of Le Griffon's historic 1679 voyage on Lake St. Clair. Do you want to, can you expound on
Yeah, most people know that, well, I won't say most people know, but students of studying LaSalle and the Griffon, they knew that LaSalle had well, a lot of people say captain, but he was actually a pilot. It was Luc Dedane, and they thought he was a giant man. So Luc was pretty much just as arrogant as Father Henningpen was. And I think people know that Father Henningpen was known as an exaggerator. But Luc you couldn't tell him anything about running the ship. He knew everything. Well, until he almost ran into Long Point and LaSalle took over. So Luke basically did what he wanted to do. And they had a lot of places, Long Island. Now, how did they know these places were there? Because they sent French voyagers ahead in canoes to trace their route out. And so they ran into numerous positions, especially up in the present day Detroit River. They had a strong current coming down from there. So they had to get this sail ship through there. And there were days they had to sit there for a couple of days just to get a decent wind so they can get the help of the wind to help sail through those straits. And then they had to make sure they didn't run aground, because back during that time, if they ran aground, it's going to take a long time, if they even could, to get their ship unstuck. And so not only in the St. Clair River, but also once they got further up into Lake Huron, there was a couple places. And they also knew where at the end of Lake Michigan, there was a huge sandbar there that they didn't know they were going to make it through. They actually were going to carry materials to build another ship and build it on the other side of those shoals. So, they would travel at night. A lot of people say they don't travel at night, but they did. That's how they got themselves in trouble. And so everything was done by, obviously, rope line, sending weights in the water. And then when they ran into heavy fogs, they had difficulty, especially in Lake Huron, with places to anchor and more, because there just simply are no places. They would be out in the open water. So that was one of the difficulties they had until they made it to the Mackinac Straits at St. Ignace, present day St. Ignace, which was an Indian settlement. And there was really a great bay there. And they pulled in there for about a week before they could, resupply and then start their journey downbound. So.
Okay. We have another question. This one from Michael. Can we expect a fully licensed archaeological research being conducted?
I think we can, but one of the issues we had, I went out, I hired archaeologists, but when the archaeologists started working with us, 2 or 3, actually all of them pulled out. And that's a long story, but I figure one of the reasons is because, the academic community, archaeologists, do not want to work with so-called treasure hunters, but we're not treasure hunters. I've never brought anything up from a ship that we didn't enter an admiralty arrest to bring it into court. We've had French archaeologists involved. Now that I found the major part of the ship, my colleagues and I, we're going to try to invite the French archaeologists back over. Michel Lohr retired. I'd been in contact with Mr. Lowen, archaeologist in Canada. But it just seems that most academic archaeologists don't want to join us. They want to actually take the project over and basically kick us out. But I'm not going to let that happen. Through the court litigation we had, we were put in custodial care of the Griffon. The state of Michigan, and I'll say this, they try to claim they own the Griffon. I always kept saying, and as I told French authorities and officials, it's a sovereign vessel. France owns it. We had 2 Indian tribes step in and say they own everything on the bottomlands, but this is a sovereign vessel and France does own it. And that was one of the outcomes of a 12-year litigation, that it is a sovereign vessel. France does own it. So whatever happens, it's not my decision, that's France. But we treat it as a major archaeological find. And by the way, what's taken so long is, once we found the bowsprit, and it took a number of years to get France over, we were in a lot of litigation. And it took years and to get permits. But when the French archaeologists were on location, Mr. Michel Louvre said, extract the bowsprit. And we did. And now here's the thing, 4.5 years later, we end up finding the rest part of the ship. But then as we started researching more, COVID sets in, you know what that did to the whole country and the world. And so in the 3 years later, now we're still back out diving. We have been, we didn't stop, but we couldn't get certain equipment in from Canada because of restrictions and immigration, bringing things across the border with trade. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so the thing is So that took about 3 years. Once that ended, we started again, and I ended up coming down with cancer. and that set me back a couple of years, even though I still dove. I got permission from the doctors. As sick as I wasn't going to let another year go. So I just kept diving and just dealing with the pain. But thank goodness I'm here and still suffering some of the consequences from chemo brain. But I'm here. But yes, to answer the question, I'm working now to get archaeologists over, and we had some good recommendations from our shipwright. I showed you one of his best friends is one of Mexico's chief underwater archaeologists, and he has offered to come over to take a look at the ship. So now you got, the person heading Mexico's archaeological divisions. He's excellent tech diver, dove in cenotes, and he's going to be coming over the way it looks to take a look at the ship also. And by the way, we're still out looking for culture materials. We can't find any. The images I showed you, there's a lot more in our book. So we just can't go down there and start moving sediment around. You have to make sure you could map everything, keep it in situ.
Yeah. A related question, Steve, from Chris. Were any artifacts from Le Griffon, oops, I have to move up in the chat, found among Native American excavations near the site or sites of the wreck?
No, we did find, we imaged, I'll put this way. Brian Abbott imaged what we believe to be a very old indigenous dugout canoe. Okay, so we did find that. We haven't checked it out yet because I didn't want to bring any kind of attention to that particular area right now. So as far as Indian artifacts, nothing in the water. On land, yes, but we don't touch those. We already know those sites are there. The one on Poverty Island, I thought for sure that would be excavated. That information was sent to the authorities. They didn't do anything about it. A number of years later, Poverty Island caught fire. So that particular area was in the vicinity of that fire. And I haven't set foot on Poverty Island probably since in 2001. We used to have a base camp there, but it's owned by the federal government today. So no other artifacts were found.
David Martin asks, are there any plans to lift the remains of Le Griffon up out of Lake Michigan and place them on display for the public?
I was hoping that would happen. I am presently working with people in Texas to basically use their freeze dryer to further preserve the bowsprit. Their freeze dryer, they invented on LaBelle so that they can, were constructed, really didn't invent it, but they constructed a large freeze dryer so they can put parts of LaBelle in. And what used to take years of chemicals, they could put in the freeze dryer and have it done in a matter of weeks and then put on display as the LaBelle that's in Austin, Texas in their museum. I was hoping to do that with the bowsprit, but I was also hoping to recover the ship. Of course, that takes money, and the archaeological study has to be done, and it should be. And so all that takes money. So it just doesn't happen overnight. And it's a big project. Just in the LaBelle, from what I understand, just the preservation of that, what they brought up was $4.5 million. And just to build a coffer dam in order to get at the ship and such was even 20 million and higher. They have some wonderful archaeologists in Texas. I've spoken to quite a few of them. But again, trying to get some of them to come up here to help us.
Oh yeah, cooperation. David Trudeau has a related statement in question. Said, very interesting considering the carpentry and shipbuilding of the day. Details in your book. LaBelle was built as a kit to be reassembled, but later assembled in France and sailed to the Gulf. It was seaworthy. It was designed to be a shallow water explorer, but failed on the oyster reefs of Matagorda. And then David asks, follow-up, have you considered the possibility that LaBelle was modeled on the Griffon? It was built several years later.
That obviously occurred to us, but we have not seen any kind of drawings, full or descriptions, only minor descriptions of the Griffon. And then which is fine, but you know, where are those descriptions coming from? Who said it? But to answer that question, we know that Griffon was not in anywhere constructed like LaBelle, or LaBelle like the Griffon might have been. But the thing is, we know for sure LaBelle, we know the dimensions of that from the archaeological studies and dimensions. And had the Griffon been built that way, it wouldn't even made it down the Niagara River. So right there, it told us something that, you know, we're not looking for anything that looks like LaBelle. This is going to look different. And by the way, just so people know, you know, when you find these ships, a lot of ships, it'd be nice to find one sitting fully intact on the bottom. That doesn't happen that often unless it's in really deep water. You're operating in an area now in Lake Michigan. And what took me so long, you know, we're searching in deep water. So we're diving, we use remote sensing equipment. But my wife kept saying, and I, believe me, wish I'd listened to her for probably 10, 15 years. Look in the shoal water, look in the shoal water. The story about it running into the sands, that's shoal water. Well, when I was laid up with a knee replacement, I was looking through satellite imagery in that particular area. So I knew where to look. And sure enough, I saw something which looked like a ship. And as soon as my knee was better, I don't think I even had all the stitches out, went up diving, and sure enough, guess what? There's a ship laying on the bottom. I could see it right from the surface of the vessel. So now we had to bring in shallow draft vessels. So I bought a pontoon boat, ripped everything off, except set it up for diving. And then when we needed the larger boats, we bring those in from Door County or Fairport. They're trap net boats and gill net boats. And so it takes multiple type of boats to get into the area because of the waters. And believe me, when those storms come up, you have to know where to go to moor a vessel. And there is almost nowhere to go.
Okay, Steve. I want to let people know again, the name of the book is Le Griffon and the Huron Islands, 1679. LaSalle's elusive flagship Le Griffon and clues that led to the location of its demise by Steve and Kathie Libert. Oh, we just made you French automatically. Libert.
Libert, right. A lot of people think it is French. Yeah.
We're going to adopt you. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
French.
Yeah, go ahead.
So with that, I'm going to kick it back over to Eva for closing comments.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Kathie, if she's still in the background. It was a wonderful presentation, and we appreciate your time, and best of luck with any new portion of what you may be able to accomplish in the discovery of this wonderful discovery. Like they mentioned, we may see more from you in the future. As we end our presentation, I want to remind people that in 2026 will be the 325th anniversary of Detroit, and we will be hosting a conference in Detroit. So stay tuned. We look forward to seeing you again. Our next event in November, our speaker is Pierre Grandieu. So excuse me if I didn't say it properly, to the origins of New France pioneer Grodun, surname distribution and genetic correlation. I'd like to call our meeting to adjourn if there's no more questions. We'll take one more if you have it. Otherwise, we say goodbye and merci for coming, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and see you next month. Bye.
Bye.